So welcome to Authors and Topics, Experiments in Poetry. I'm really excited to teach this course. If you've had me before, you already know me. I'm Dr. Repberg. If you haven't had me before, I'm really excited to get to know you, and I hope you're excited for the course. So by way of just sort of a brief overview of the course, I'll focus briefly on the two key words in its title. I don't mean authors and topics. That's a placeholder we put there to create this new sort of kind of course. It's just getting taught once. The two keywords though I'm thinking of are experiments and poetry. And I'll start with poetry, which is a field I care about very deeply. I take great pleasure in reading poetry and getting to know poetry with other people. One interesting thing that's happened during the pandemic is that there's sort of everybody's looking for things to do. One traditional role of poetry is to console. This is a time for consolation because there's a lot of bad stuff going on in the world right now. People are experiencing death and injury. They are lonely in their homes. Poetry, I can't promise that poetry presents some kind of cure-all for what ails us right now, but I do think it is a class well suited to this time. The thoughts of poets can help us get through things at times. So what is poetry? That's a question that we'll actually explore a great deal in the course, and especially once we get into the more experimental stuff in the second quarter, we'll find that a lot of people are going to challenge that definition over and over. And so we'll encounter lots of definitions, but I'm going to throw out one to start. I think it's a pretty bad one, but a pretty famous poet said it. So Samuel Taylor Coleridge says that poetry is the best words in the best order. Now, who gets to determine what's best is a complicated thing. What it means for something to be in the best order is a complicated thing, but that can be a starting place for us. So whatever poetry is, it's about arranging words, sometimes things other than words, we'll get to that eventually too, in a way that's sort of pleasing to the reader or instructive to the reader, putting words in a certain order to do something, to achieve some literary effect. Poetry should be fun though, and that's why I think we'll try to make poetry fun in the course. So, best words in the best order is one thing, but there's a line from a Robert Frost poem that I really love that sort of gets closer to what I think of as poetic effect. In Robert Frost's poem, The Mountain, there's a character who says, "All the fun's in how you say a thing." And there's how, right? How is a key word for poetry. How did the poet do it? Why did they make the choices they did? And why does it make us feel a certain way? These are big questions as we pursue the course. Second keyword, you are more used to hearing in your science classes. It's experiment. In MSI and all of your classes, you think a lot about experimental method. In the course description, I talk a little bit about how in the world of the arts, experiment can mean something different. We think of scientific experiment as very rigorous and very structured, when it sometimes seems like poets are throwing out rules or adopting arbitrary rules for no real good reason. But they share with science a desire to sort of push things forward, to do things that have never been done before, to learn things that have never been learned before by acting in unconventional ways. The word experiment has a pretty long history in poetry though. So we will step back to William Wordsworth at some point, and I will show you the preface of Lyrical Ballads from 1802, which you may have already encountered in LE3, in which he sort of declares these sort of famous romantic poems an experiment. In the more contemporary sense, though, there's lots of, there's lots of things get weirder, right? So that's one thing that we want to do in the course is we want to get weird, and we want to experience poets who have gotten weird. I'm going to close by reading a poem that is an experiment, a pretty contemporary one that I think is really interesting and weird. I'll tell you what it is, and then. So the poem I just want to show by way of closing this video is by K. Salam Muhammad, and it's called "Oh We Be Few, Oh We Be Few," she huffed. Go softly to the Disneyland Hotel, its simulacral threshold grown sublime. The bedrooms all emit that new car smell, like nothing else in bougie Anaheim. Where leftist brownies get our mothers high, humanity is poorly led, forsooth. In Eisenhower's shadow lies the lie, in Soviet-run brothels lies the truth. Henceforth, let odorous intensities of talkativeness, torture, filth, and death stiffly arouse posh gilded melodies Beethoven might have come up with on meth. The tawdry footsteps of a bawdy goth are footsteps washed in washed up Oshkosh broth. Now this just looks totally silly, and it is. It's K. Salam Muhammad writes a kind of poetry that's sort of trying to be willfully absurd, but there's a real method to it, and you will notice that this is a genuine Shakespearean sonnet. If you don't know what a sonnet is, well, you'll figure it out eventually, but there's 14 lines. It's got this very particular rhyme scheme. It's written in iambic pentameter. But how he composed these poems, they're called sonograms partly because they are based on Shakespeare's sonnets. So here is sonnet 3. Look in thy glass and tell the face thou viewest. Now is the time that face should form another. This is an entreaty to a beloved to produce offspring by Shakespeare. Its relationship to the sonogram, though, is that K. Salam Muhammad literally takes the poem and sticks it into a tool that just sort of randomizes the letters. So the material of the letters become the basis for what he's trying to do. He drags them around until he creates an entirely new poem with a kind of absurd theme that is still a Shakespearean sonnet. So this is just one experiment of many. We'll encounter lots of experiments over the course of the semester, but know that we'll start with poetry that's sort of more comfortable and familiar. We'll eventually get to some pretty weird stuff that needs some thinking through. I'm looking forward to exploring all this poetry with you.